heavy,
bored.
Like honest. I think there is something that's kind of like unpretentious about her writing, which I will praise. Um,
It's what the kind of a person that doesn't like poetry or understand poetry could be drawn to. So yeah, I see what you're saying with that. Because
yeah,
you can
and
pick up
but
on
it
it. Yeah.
also isn't like trying too hard. Like that was one thing. I know that we talked about this a little bit, but like reading James Franco, there was something there that felt more pretentious to me.
Well, because he went through an MFA, he went through, he became close with Frank Bedart. Frank Bedart, the reason he got
And
published
still is
with,
not really a
yeah,
writer.
yeah,
Right.
and
I mean, as far as we know, like, maybe he writes screenplays, etc. But
honestly, I don't think Franco is a bad director. Like, I don't think
Nick,
he's a bad director. I don't think he's a bad actor. I think he needs to be in the right role. He's not like a very versatile or like great actor, but I
these are
think
all
he's
talented people we're talking about
right.
today. Just for so we're
Poetry,
all clear.
but I think you're making a good point is because like the unpretentiousness is what the kind of people that don't understand poetry can glom off of because they get turned off by more pretentious work.
Yeah.
But like it's this idea that like poetry is considered this, that it could be anything, that it could be a pile of dirt, that it could be a stone in a pond or whatever. This idea that it's been romanticized to oblivion, and this is what I always rail against on this podcast, and the reason I say we need to take it more seriously, because it lets people that are maybe very good at one thing think that they can also do this thing, right? And I know we live in a world where everybody believes that they're a political expert, they believe that they're a fucking foreign relations expert every time something trends online. But it just really gets under my skin when people think they can do this and then we praise it as if it's like breakthrough or genius. And
Well, that's the thing, though, that I mean, there are so many things that, like, there are so many shapes that it can take, right? Like, you don't have to be a master of form, like received forms is not something that you have to master before being a published poet.
sure,
You do not have to have read all of the, hottest contemporary poets, nor do you have to have read like all of the sort of foundational poets, whatever that means to you. You don't
sure.
have to have really read poetry to write a poem, you know. I and that I'm sure we could argue about and blah 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 blah. But like
Well,
you
we
could sort
talked
of
about this. Yeah,
explain, like I mean, I think even I sort of say
anybody
that, but I think
could. Yeah,
yeah, you could have some sense of like what rhyming is, for example. Like I'm sure
right.
we all did that in kindergarten at some point, whether or not you remember. It's like why, we tell nursery rhymes to children. Yes, there's more like formal qualities there. Um,
Well, I
but I
think.
do think
Yeah,
that in that way, while poetry as a form of literature might be viewed as one of the least accessible forms of literature, like one of the least accessible genres of literature very often, not always. Um, I think it's also the most accessible from a writing perspective,
well, it's
if
the
that
same
makes sense.
thing. Yeah, like we've talked about this on a couple of the craft episodes we've done. Listeners can go back and look at those, or
I mean,
Bloom.
I think was like interested in writing poetry before I became interested in reading poetry like every other asshole. Not
Right.
every other asshole. There were all the people that came before us that were like great. And, like, I mean, I also like hear about people that really did have um, childhoods that were filled with poetry because their parents were poetry readers or,
Well, yeah, and we've said this before. Like, yeah, almost anybody can write something that we call a poem or resemble a poem, but it doesn't make it good. Like that's the
and I
difference.
think with
Is yeah,
something like a story, when you like, have to fill the page from, the West Coast to the East Coast, it's like not, it's easier to tell when it's bad. There is so much you can be missing from a short story that is so easy to pick up on. There is so much more you have to, be aware of when you're writing a novel. There are so many more things that your readers are going to be like, what the fuck if you didn't include something or if it doesn't go anywhere, right? So I think from a writing perspective, poetry offers in some way the least pressure to make something that feels, I don't want to say like the least pressure to make something that feels complete or like finalized, but it kind of does, right? Because also even like authors will publish.
Inner.
Resources, American resources.
shows such a lack of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.